a far much more substantial role, and their contributions is incalculable if you consider what opportunity costs hosting the kind of number of refugees and IDPs that they have cost in terms of investments and other things that they need to do for their citizens. And so I think this year we've seen a number of member states, some of whom are here, Somalia, South Sudan, Equatorial Guinea, become state parties to the Kampala Convention. But as the distinguished representative of Mauritius reminded us a while ago, it is not enough to sign, to ratify, to domesticate. And to add on to his sentiments, as somebody reminded us some weeks ago, it is not even enough to do all that, but it is critical to dedicate resources and implement the commitments that member states make. And we are here, and we've always been here, and we'll continue to be here to support, to work with, to accompany member states in fulfilling those obligations through a wide array of issues to which I may come later on, including but not limited to the core mandate of the organization for which I work, in part which is to mobilize resources, not just for forced displacement, but also for general humanitarian needs globally. I give the floor back to you, Alois.
Thank you very much. The question actually is leading to one thing, and I'm happy that on the notes which you ended with regard to the fact that basically we need to uphold through the various processes in terms of signing and ratification. But then after that, we need to domesticate. And in terms of burden sharing, what role can international organizations like yours do to assist member states in the domestication process of the treaty? It being understood, as the ambassador earlier mentioned, the ambassador of Mauritius, with regard to the fact that it is possible that you ratify without domesticating the treaty, then that treaty does not come to the level of the street. It does not come to the level of implementation. What role then do you think that member states can actually play with regard to helping member states to domesticate the question of the treaty itself? Let me at this point welcome Brian to this. We understand that you are a little bit seized up. Welcome. Mr. Johnston.
No, thank you very much. Domestication, in my appreciation, is largely a function of municipal, by that I mean country level, legal, administrative, and related processes. And to that extent, and again, I'd like to, if he's in the room, I know that I'd like to congratulate Professor Chiloka for his designation as an expert supporting the high-level panel that's just been announced by the Secretary General to look more closely at the issues of IDPs, and to salute him for the work that we know he's been doing since before the Kampala Convention, but after that, to do precisely what you're asking. And that is to bring his extensive experience, knowledge, and expertise, legal, on forced displacement issues to member states to support them in ensuring that they go beyond just ratification to domesticate and implement. Beyond the technical and the legal aspects of that, obviously all these things require resources. And to the extent that the international community can support member states with allowing them to free up some resources to fulfill those processes, again, the international community remains ready to support through a variety of instruments and means to ensure that member states come to the point where they have the necessary instruments domestically to implement the convention.
Thank you very much, Johnston, for that very succinct response. And let me again welcome Brian to this panel. And let me then ask you a very provocative question, because I know I'm not going to ask Brian any question that does not go to the deep well and elicit some passion. And I believe that that passion, sometimes we need it in such a fora like this. Let me ask you, who profits from displacement on the continent? And in this regard, we talk about the grand bargain. Maybe you are not too sure about the grand bargain. The grand bargain actually is part of the elements of the New York Declaration that started actually from the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul, which in actual fact is about the reapportioning of the flow of resources from the north down to the global south, particularly with regard to the question of who spends what, who gains what in terms of humanitarian spending. Now we're asking, what is the role, what is that grand bargain? Do you see it as something that is going to be effective? And linking to that is the question of the localization of aid in Africa. Localization of aid is, bringing aid directly more to the people. So how do we then see the reapportioning of resources as well as that within the context of humanitarian spending on the continent? I thank you.
I think, thank you, Excellencies. The background to the African humanitarian crisis is it is misery for the natives and it is business for the saviors. And the saviors normally come from very specific countries. And the benefits are not only financial, the benefits are in terms of knowledge, the benefits are also in terms of narrative of humaneness. The savior is always different in skin color to you and I. So even if there was no money that they were getting, they would get a human superiority advantage, that they are salvaging poor, miserable natives that can't take care of themselves and that can't plan sufficiently to take care of themselves. So the fundamental problem is not just reapportioning of resources, but of agency. You can move the entire World Bank into Timbuktu. You can move it, if you care, into Ndombolo village. It will not make a difference to the question of control and power. Arguably, therefore, my brother, if Coca-Cola headquarters moved to Africa, it does not make Coca-Cola an African company. If under the grand bargain, all we're talking about is that more dollars will get to the natives, throwing money at the problem does it not solve its locus. Its locus is the global paradigm of development, which we force feed developing countries to take in, is unlikely to produce anything but misery, number one. But number two, until we realize that many of our countries remain unviable as little entities to deal either with questions of economic development or questions of humanitarian crisis. If they are climatic or ecological, they are often as a result of consumption elsewhere. If they are man-made, they are often as a result of consumption of weaponry and propaganda from elsewhere, or just our own poor governance, as I think Professor Chaloka said yesterday. My own sense is there needs to be in this particular room a definancialization in mentality in terms of addressing the question of what does resourcing for effective humanitarian response mean? It means knowledge, it means infrastructure, it means institution, it means coalescence of resources. It means data, the ability to predict what is likely to happen and to preempt. If there's no preemption capacity, if there is only reactive capacity, no matter how well resourced, what you have brought is elegant poverty that can deal with misery in a measure of comfort. If what we're talking about under Agenda 2063 is transformation, it seems to me that the little governments represented by people sitting in front of me need to accept that an African humanitarian fund is an imperative. Yes, over and above the little funds that you are talking about at a national level. there are things that you are not able to effectively respond to. The UN spends close to $3 billion on peace support operations in a country that has not gone to peace for the while that we've been spending that amount. So expenditure of money in Africa will only have. The second thing is localization of aid. Our people were not in humanitarian crisis until colonialism. Were there no plagues? There were plagues. Were there no floods? There were floods. How come the notion of humanitarian crisis has increased since independence? Or since how come under colonial rule you did not seem to need so much humanitarian aid in Nigeria, in Mali, and elsewhere? Let me explain to you what I think it is. It is simple. The idea that you can't govern yourself because you neither have the moral fortitude, nor the intellectual capacity, nor the foresight is perpetrated in this. When you do your development planning, there is not in most of our national budgets a sufficient amount put down for contingency. There's only enough for expenditure. You localize, it's localization based on current needs. There's nothing for the prospective. And if that doesn't happen, we are wasting time.
Thank you very much, Brian. I saved that to the last, but let me call on Ambassador Matata. What's your take on this particular subject matter? Because I really do not want to go into the usual burden sharing, blah, blah, blah. Those are not the real issues. As Brian has actually pointed out, that these are not the real issues. The issue is really linking humanitarian response to development. And I just want to take on this before I come to the representative of the international organizations here, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, moderator, and I appreciate the development made by Brian. I am one of those people, perhaps because of my background. I'm not a specialist of humanitarian issues. I'm an economist, and I've been doing a lot of development, of course, programming. I don't think there is a humanitarian crisis, in my view. And I don't think there is this issue of delocalization of aid. From the very beginning, I think, and that's why I appreciate really so far the outcome of this forum. This is a very inclusive forum where you have the member state, you have the refugees, IDPs, there are also former refugees, former IDPs, which I also appreciated. But of course, they are Rex. I recognize my colleagues from ESC, IGAD, and ECOWAS. I think, and I'm coming back to the first question you asked. What do we ask the rest? I think what we should ask the rest, and we should also agree that that is our focus. We should first of all agree that the starting point is the beneficiaries. If we focus on the beneficiaries, and I want to borrow also what my colleague from left said, if we focus on the beneficiaries, they will tell us exactly what they need, and they have said it. I think they have spoken to us. And we will measure also the contribution of Africa and outside. Now, there is something, I was chatting with my brother here the other day, there is something we don't even measure. Take, for example, we have been listening to the case, the best practice of Uganda. If there is somebody from Uganda here, I don't think he will be able to tell me if there is somewhere in evaluation, in monetary terms, of what Uganda has spent to accommodate its open door policy. It's huge money. You can't imagine how much it is. But those figures, they are not known. So when you are going to talk to the rest of the world, you don't tell that story. You don't say those figures. That is number one. Number two, I think there is another thing. If you have a forum like this one, where the IDPs and the refugees have had the floor. When you go to talk to the rest of the world, do you go with them? Do they have the floor? I don't think so. So I think, in my view, there is so much to say about delocalization of aid or humanitarian crisis, but I think we should look at ourselves. How much is this crisis? Is it because of us or because of the rest of the world? I will stop there.
Thank you very much. I think we've heard of Brian, we had heard from Ambassador Matata. I think I'd like to call on Okech to actually give us, a favor of what the international community actually, our international partners actually feel about this, particularly with regard to Grand Bargain and the localization of aid, because that essentially encapsulates how resources actually do get down to the people and the beneficiaries in particular.
Thank you very much, Olabisi. Thank you very much, Brian, for your very provocative, very positively provocative observations and appreciation of where we are and perhaps some prescriptions of how we should proceed. The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is an entity within the Secretariat of the United Nations. Its mandate is contained in UN General Assembly Resolution 46-182 of 1991. And in that is a major partnership role. I was very heartened and glad the other day when our colleague from IOM in the platform that we had on the Kampala Convention, noted that we work with them and support what work they're doing on data. Again, as mandated by member states through the Central Emergency Response Fund. Now, we have a situation at the moment, I think the statistics, I don't like statistics that much personally. It's about 25.2 million people on the continent at the moment. Those are people that are displaced. They may be with host communities or they're in camps. They need assistance, and our job is to ensure coordinated interagency support and assistance to those populations now. On localization, and all this builds to that, when the former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon convened the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul in May 2016, the African Union presented a common African position. I presume that many of you will have copies of that, and if you look at it, Pillar 10 of that is on partnerships and financing. And what we do about that and the need for us as African member states and the African constituency where we have a lot of these problems to rise up and to mobilize resources so that we can respond to some of these issues on the continent and to build partnerships more broadly. A few days ago, whilst we were here in Kampala, the chairperson of the commission convened the private sector in Addis to mobilize resources to respond to the question of Ebola, the African private sector. So my answer is in two parts. I think that Africa is doing its part per the Common African Position on Humanitarian Effectiveness, the Istanbul commitments. Can it do more? Perhaps it can. But there is a lot of work that is being done that I cannot even begin to tell you what it is. Those are just a few examples. The second part of my response to your curiosity has to do with the recognition from Istanbul, and I think a long-standing recognition, that the closer you bring resources and assistance to those that are affected and work with local communities and local organizations, the more effective it is likely to be. And I can assure you that if you look at, for example, the disbursements from the UN General Assembly created Central Emergency Response Fund, this year alone, the statistics, I don't have them immediately, you will see that there's been a shift in the allocation of resources by the Emergency Relief Coordinator to local organizations to respond to life-saving disasters and crises, as well as chronic deficits in terms of sectors that are not funded properly. So we are keen to ensure that, to the extent possible, there's no agency between the resources and the organizations at the grassroots level that are working on this. But that's work in progress, and it will take some time to do that. Finally, on these questions, I'd like to refer you to the 2020 Global Humanitarian Overview. In it, there are a whole range of things that we have done as OCHA, working with all of you, member states, UN agencies, and all the other partners elsewhere, to put together the most authoritative assessment of what the needs will look like next year. And one of the things in that Global Humanitarian Overview is precisely what we're talking about here, okay? Ensuring that, number one, we work more closely with people that are affected or affected populations themselves, and channeling more resources directly to local organizations to respond to some of those problems. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much. Brian, I'm still going to come back to you, but in the meantime, we would like to listen to particularly our member states, because, and of course, the young people around here, so that they can actually tell us and give inputs into the question of burden sharing. It's been understood that burden sharing in itself, there has been a lot of controversies about this. The question of responsibility sharing, the question of quantifying what Ambassador Matata said, that, for instance, Uganda and several other countries have put in a lot, which in itself has not been quantified in terms of its monetary terms. But beyond that is also the issue that Brian raised, and this is actually within the context of linking humanitarian response, because when we talk about burden sharing, we are actually talking about humanitarian response. But we all know that floods will come, to Mozambique every time. We now know that cyclones of different types will also bring in its own disasters and so on. We see that in countries like Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and so on, apart from conflict, there is also, a lot of responses to, disasters occasioned by, flooding and so on and so forth. So those ones are there. We also know that conflict, again, is a major factor in terms of causing displacement both within and across the borders. So therefore, we need to now look at how then can we permanently or put in place measures that will ameliorate these issues. Therefore, we need to link these responses to development. How then do we link it to development? How then does localization come in, apart from responding to just the palliatives that you give people when there is a disaster or when there is, conflict or something like that? How then do we know the need for, improving on governance on all rounds? How then do member states are prepared also to actually respond in terms of improving governance? I want to throw these to the public, to the hall, and let us see what the responses can be and what we can take away as a part of recommendations for this particular session. The floor is open. Could you please introduce yourself and the organization that you represent?
Yes, my name is Kagwe, and I represent IGAD. My question is about this idea of burden sharing, because it appears to me that the manner in which we are framing this whole thing is that somehow and I think this is a narrative that has been pushed by governments and even by people, that a lot of African states feel that when you have a humanitarian crisis where refugees are coming into your country or where you have displaced people, that somehow that is then construed as a burden for that country. Because the way people see it is that if we have refugees, they're going to come and take whatever it is that is ours, whether that be jobs, whether that be resources. And so there has been a negative perception that has been construed by countries that refugees are a burden and that now we have to find resources to cater for them. And I think that that is a wrong perception. And one of the questions I want to know is, how is it that we can correct that? Because economically, the way in which we think about our economic policy and the way we think about our economic planning is that we have very little, so we cannot share it widely. So let us ensure that we keep as much as possible for ourselves. Of course, this is poor economic policy because the prosperous countries that we migrate to do the opposite of that. They encourage refugees. They encourage people to come and live in their countries because they see the economic benefits for that. Why is it that we cannot see the same? The secondly, and the other burden with which member states see is security, where they say that, oh, if we let these people come in, there'll be a security threat to us, or they will bring in all sorts of bad people and things like that. I think also that is a perception that is negative, that is viewed as a burden, and that is incorrect. So I think that in terms of the security and the economy, those are two issues that are not true, that are seen as the reason why we should not allow refugees. And I think that it would be good if that was addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps one needs to also bring to the fore that we are actually dealing with internal displacement here. I want us to also focus more on internal displacement and the question of responses to internal displacement. Perhaps that's, but of course we can't talk about internal displacement without refugees. That I bear in mind. Excellency, the Ambassador of Sahrawi.
Thank you so much, and good evening, good afternoon. I would like to congratulate all the presenter, and you have asked question, burden sharing, between who and who? You orient to the African Union member state, or African Union and on global level United Nations, or everyone, or between the African Union member state and REX. I think you are talking about division of labor. We have not decided what kind of division of labor yet. We are in the process, as you know very well, on the level of African Union, then to know exactly who is doing what. I think, in my understanding, this is a global problem and need to have a global response. From member states, from REX, from the continent, from the United Nations at large. But when it comes to the sharing responsibility, then you will go back to the cause of the conflict, the cause of the refugees, the cause of IDPs, and then how you address it collectively. When you're talking about sharing responsibility, means you are addressing to many actors, not only individual actors. In this case, I think it is important to elaborate in depth what kind of crisis, who is involved. Then you will be leading also to who you need to assume the responsibility. Therefore, you reach another level, which is accountability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Let me also just point out that basically, you're very correct. But see, the Kampala Convention do actually sets out what the responsibilities of both state actors, non-state actors, international partners, and all that really talks about. And again, the question of accountability, very, very, very important in the sense that, I'll give you an example. In Myanmar, if there was an internationally binding document that bounded Myanmar at the time you have Cyclone Nagis, when Myanmar actually deterred in terms of responses and allowed international partners to come in to assist Myanmar in Cyclone Nagis, that situation would not have subsisted for so long. It will have accelerated responses in terms of immediate humanitarian response to the situation in Myanmar. So the question of having a legally binding instrument allows for that kind of thing to happen, where everybody knows exactly who is what and can respond.
Merci, monsieur le modérateur. Je suis Prince Théophile Tatitsa, responsable de la coopération et de la communication du Conseil panafricain des autorités traditionnelles et coutumières, dont le siège est au Bénin. Merci de me donner l'occasion ainsi de parler au nom de ce conseil qui réunit les autorités traditionnelles de beaucoup de pays. Alors, quand on parle de responsabilités, les crises et les conflits qui nous réunissent ici sont souvent nés des crises, des conflits de famille et des conflits tribaux et ethniques. Et donc, les États se retrouvent face aux situations qui sont nées dans le cœur des populations. Et on ne peut pas chercher des solutions à ces problèmes-là sans faire recours aux gardiens des traditions et aux responsables des communautés qui sont respectés par des groupes humains. Alors, nous pensons que l'Union africaine, depuis sa création, porte les germes de la sagesse de nos ancêtres. Et les traditions africaines devraient être convoquées pour résoudre les problèmes de gouvernance qui sont générateurs de crises et notamment des déplacements forcés. Et la première chose que nous pouvons proposer, c'est que pour assurer la prise en compte de l'approche africaine dans le mandat de l'Union, on parle de partenariat, le Conseil panafricain qui est dirigé par Sa Majesté Dada Korpon Odegbe, qui est par ailleurs vice-président de l'Assemblée nationale du Bénin. Alors le CPATC propose la création d'un conseil consultatif des autorités traditionnelles et coutumières au sein de l'Union, ce qui permettra de voir comment on peut résoudre certains problèmes à la base en échangeant, n'est-ce pas, au niveau institutionnel. Et ce n'est pas seulement le Conseil panafricain. Les autorités traditionnelles et coutumières de diverses nationalités sont disposées à participer activement aux efforts entrepris en direction de la résolution des conflits en cours et à la construction post-conflit, n'est-ce pas, pour assurer l'intégration sociale et le développement. Alors, parlant précisément de la question des réfugiés, des rapatriés et des personnes déplacées, on a constaté que dans la recherche des solutions durables, les États ont fait recours aux partenaires bilatéraux et internationaux, aux agences d'intelligence et de sécurité privée pour la formation des groupes spéciaux, sans pour autant qu'une solution durable ne soit trouvée. Aussi, des voix s'élèvent de plus en plus pour décrier l'incapacité de certains agents des forces régulières, dont des armées, ainsi que des représentants des missions religieuses à inspirer la primauté de l'intérêt général. Il faut noter que certains conflits prennent leur source dans les conflits religieux, les croyances. C'est le cas de Boko Haram, qui veut dire qu'on rejette la civilisation étrangère. Mais ceux-là qui conduisent ces guerres ne sont pas mandatés par les autorités traditionnelles ou par les dirigeants autochtones, mais pourtant réclament une civilisation qui aussi n'est pas africaine. Ils ont donc créé un État fictif, l'État islamique, pour faire des conflits. Et l'Union africaine, qui ne reconnaît pas ces États, se trouve donc face aux crises créées par un État virtuel. Donc, il faut voir